Clara Monroe used to save lives in Chicago's finest hospitals. Now she's hiding in a remote mountain cabin, her reputation destroyed, her savings gone. With barely enough food to last the week, she's facing a brutal winter alone. But fate has other plans. One night, during the worst blizzard in decades, she discovers a man bleeding in the snow. He's handsome, wealthy, and running from men who want him dead. Using the last of her supplies, she fights to keep him alive, not knowing he's Sawyer Langston, the most powerful rancher in the territory. As she nurses him back to health, something unexpected happens. He sees past her broken reputation to the woman beneath, and she discovers that sometimes the greatest healing happens to the heart. But can love survive when his enemies finally catch up with them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last can of soup mocked Clara from the shelf. Cream of mushroom. She'd been saving it, though she couldn't say what for anymore. Outside her cabin window, fat snowflakes obscured the mountain peaks, adding another layer to the isolation that had become her world. She pulled her threadbare sweater tighter, counting the logs beside the potbelly stove. 3 days of warmth, maybe 4 if she was careful. Her gaze drifted to the torn newspaper clipping pinned above her narrow bed. "Prominent nurse accused in patient death," the headline screamed, the words as sharp now as they'd been 8 months ago. She didn't need to read the rest. Every word was seared into her memory. How quickly they'd turned on her, colleagues. Of 15 years becoming strangers overnight. Never mind her spotless record. Never mind that she'd saved hundreds of lives in Chicago Memorial's emergency department. One mistake, one terrible mistake, born of exhaustion and an understaffed night shift. She'd double-checked the medication, hadn't she? The investigation said otherwise. But those final moments in room 412 had become a blur of alarms and chaos. They needed a scapegoat, and she'd served perfectly. Clara moved to the window, watching the snow erase any trace of the supply trail to town. She'd have to dig it out again tomorrow, assuming the storm passed. Her fingers, once steady enough to thread the finest sutures, had grown rough from chopping wood and carrying water. They'd called her Angel of the ER once. Now she was just another ghost in these mountains, hiding from a past she couldn't outrun. The radio crackled with static from its perch near the stove. Into severe weather warning for Aspen Ridge and surrounding areas. Residents advised to... The voice faded into white noise. Clara adjusted the antenna, but it was no use. The batteries were dying, and she'd used the last of her emergency fund on antibiotics when that fever hit last month. Her stomach growled, reminding her it had been nearly 20 hours since her last meal, half a portion of beans, carefully rationed. The nearest town was 10 miles down the mountain, might as well be 100 in this weather. Pride had kept her from seeking help, even when the pastor's wife had offered a place at their table. She couldn't bear their pitying looks, their whispered speculations about why a city nurse would choose this exile. The truth was, she hadn't chosen it at all. This cabin, her great-aunt's final property, was simply the last door still open to her. The medical board had suspended her license pending review, but she knew how these things went. One death was all it took to end a career built over decades. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and Clara pulled out her aunt's old quilts, layers of memory stitched into fading fabric. As she wrapped one around her shoulders, her fingers brushed against something hard in the pocket of her jeans, her hospital ID badge. She'd meant to throw it away dozens of times, but something always stopped her. Maybe it was hope, foolish as that seemed now. Or maybe it was fear that without it, the person she'd been would disappear completely. Night was falling early, as it always did this time of year. Clara lit the kerosene lamp, its weak light casting long shadows on the cabin walls. She'd have to make a decision soon, brave the trek to town, or she pushed the thought away. There were other options. There had to be. The wind rose to a howl, and somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped under the weight of snow. Clara stared at a can of soup, mentally dividing it into portions. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she'd open it when she really needed it. For now, she had her memories, her pride, and the bitter comfort of knowing that no one could die by her hands out here in the wilderness. If only she'd known how wrong she was about that. The old radio sputtered and wheezed on its shelf. More static than a signal now. Clara adjusted the antenna for the dozenth time, trying to catch fragments of the weather report through the interference. Unprecedented storm system. Emergency supplies. Stay indoors. The rest dissolved into crackling noise. She pressed her forehead against the frozen window pane, watching the wall of white advance across the valley. The mountains were already gone, swallowed by the storm. Even the massive pine that had been her landmark since autumn had vanished into the swirling snow. She'd seen bad weather during her months of exile, but something about this storm felt different, malevolent almost. The memory of her last night at Chicago Memorial surfaced unbidden. It had been snowing then too, the emergency room packed with accident victims. She'd worked 20 hours straight, running on coffee and determination. The overhead lights had flickered, a brownout from the storm, just as she'd reached for the medication drawer. If only she'd double-checked the vial. If only... A sharp crack from outside scattered her thoughts. One of the pine branches had given way under its burden of snow. The sound echoed off the mountainside like a gunshot, making her jump. The radio chose that moment to briefly clear, wind speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour, all mountain. Passes closed. Clara did a mental inventory of her supplies for the third time that day. The can of soup, of course. 2 potatoes sprouting eyes in the root cellar. Half a package of crackers she'd been hoarding. Her stomach twisted at the thought of another night of hunger, but she forced the feeling down. She was good at that now, forcing down feelings. The temperature was dropping. She could feel it in her bones. She added another log to the stove, wincing at how quickly her stockpile was diminishing. The flames caught slowly, as if they too were tired of fighting the cold. Above the stove hung her last reminder of civilization. A Denver medical supply calendar, pages curled from humidity. January stared back at her, mocking her with its cheerful images of pristine hospital corridors. Something stirred in the woods, a shadow darker than the storm. Probably a deer, she told herself, though deer usually had better sense than to be out in weather like this. The shadow moved again, closer this time. Clara reached for the old hunting rifle her aunt had left behind, then stopped. She'd never fired it, wouldn't know how if she needed to. The radio crackled once more, a different voice this time. Advised to evacuate higher elevations, emergency services suspended. The batteries chose that moment to die, leaving her in sudden, absolute silence. The kind of silence that preceded catastrophe in the ER, that terrible moment when the monitors went flat. She thought of Dr. Harrison's face when he delivered the news about her suspension. "I'm sorry, Clara. We all know you're a good nurse, but we have to follow procedure." His sympathy had been worse than anger would have been. She'd walked out of that hospital for the last time with her head high, waiting until she reached her car to break down. The wind changed direction, hurling snow against the cabin with renewed fury. Something rattled in the chimney, and for a moment it sounded almost like voices. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the bones too close beneath her skin. She'd lost weight since coming here, too much weight. Her nursing training told her she was approaching dangerous territory, but what choice did she have? The shadow moved again, definitely closer now. Clara stepped away from the window, her heart picking up speed. In Chicago, fear had meant gangs in the ER, domestic. Violence victims whose abusers followed them to the hospital. Here, fear wore different faces. Starvation, freezing, the 1,000 natural shocks these mountains delivered daily. As darkness settled over the cabin like a shroud, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was bringing something with. It's something that would change everything. She had no way of knowing how right she was. The crash came just before midnight. Clara jolted awake in her chair by the stove, her aunt's quilt sliding to the floor. At first, she thought it was another tree branch giving way, but then came the sound that made her blood freeze. A human cry, weak but distinct, carried on the wind. She pressed her eye to a gap in the frost-covered window. The storm had turned the world into a white blur, but there, a darker shape sprawled in the snow, about 50 yards from her cabin. It moved barely. "Don't," she whispered to herself. "Don't get involved." But her hands were already reaching for her coat, muscle memory from countless emergency calls taking over. The broken pocket watch that would later become so significant lay face down in the snow beside him, its golden chain reflecting the cabin's dim light. The cold hit her like a physical blow as she stepped outside. The snow was knee-deep. Each step a battle. Wind-driven ice crystals stung her face, but she forced herself forward. 15 steps, 20. The figure became clearer, a man, face down, blood staining the snow around him. Her training kicked in automatically. Airway, breathing, circulation. He was alive, but his pulse was thready under her fingers. Blood matted his dark hair, and his expensive coat was torn at the shoulder, revealing a deep gash. Not from a fall, the edges were too clean. This was a knife wound. "Can you hear me?" she shouted over the wind. His eyelids flickered but didn't open. Hypothermia was setting in. She could tell by the blue tinge to his lips. She had minutes, not hours, to get him inside. Clara grabbed his shoulders, trying to lift him. Once she could have managed with the help of orderlies and proper equipment. Now, weakened by months of near starvation, she could barely shift his weight. "Come on," she growled, more to herself than him. "Come on." His eyes opened then, revealing irises the color of storm clouds. Recognition flickered there, not of her, but of something else. Fear. His hand clutched weakly at her arm. "They're coming," he rasped. "Have to warn." "Save your strength," she ordered in her best ER voice. "I'm going to help you, but you need to help me too. Can you stand?" He tried, his legs buckling immediately. Clara caught him, nearly going down herself. Together they managed a stumbling walk, more a controlled fall forward through the snow, each step painted more red on white. Too much blood. The rational part of her mind catalogued his symptoms. Class 2 hemorrhage, moderate hypothermia. Possible. Concussion. The journey to her cabin door felt endless. Halfway there, he lost consciousness completely, becoming dead weight against her shoulder. Clara's muscles screamed in protest, but she kept moving. One step, another. The past echoed in her head. Dr. Harrison's voice. "You push yourself too. Hard, Clara. You can't save everyone." But she could save this one, had to. They nearly fell through the cabin door. Clara kicked it shut behind them, the wind howling in protest. In the lamplight, she got her first clear look at him. Strong features, expensive clothes under the blood and dirt, a man used to commanding respect, not lying helpless on a stranger's floor. His skin was cold as marble under her hands as she checked his vital signs again. Pulse weakening, breathing shallow. The knife wound was deep, but had missed anything vital, small mercy there. But the cold and blood loss were killing him just as surely. She had supplies for this at least. The antibiotics she'd spent her last dollars on, clean bandages hoarded against her own possible future needs, basic suture kit. Not much, but it would have to be enough. As she cut away his coat, something fell from the pocket. That broken pocket watch, its hands frozen at 11:47. The case was pure gold, the kind of luxury she'd only seen on her wealthiest patients. Whoever he was, he didn't belong in these mountains any more than she did. "Stay with me," she murmured, falling into the old patterns as she worked to save him. "Stay with me, stranger." Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in that howling darkness, others were coming. But for now, in the warmth of the cabin, there was only the steady rhythm of his breathing and the familiar dance of needle and thread, as Clara did what she'd been born to do. Heal. Clara's medical kit, the last remnant of her professional life, lay open on the table beside her, its contents pitifully sparse. She'd used half her sterile gauze already, and the antibiotics would only last 3 days at proper dosage, but those were problems for later. Right now, her patient was dying. "Don't you dare," she muttered, pressing another bandage against the wound. Blood seeped through, slower now but still steady. In a hospital, he'd be getting a transfusion, having his vitals monitored by machines worth more than this entire cabin. Here she had only her hands and her knowledge, and the gnawing fear that it wouldn't be enough. His fever spiked as she worked, delirium setting in. "The papers," he mumbled, trying to rise. "Have to stop them." Clara pressed him back down, noting how his skin burned under her palm. The contrast with his earlier hypothermia worried her. Infection was setting in fast. "Sawyer," he said suddenly, his eyes focusing on her face with startling clarity. "Sawyer Langston, if I don't—" He broke off, coughing. "Need you to tell—" "Save your strength," Clara ordered, falling into the familiar rhythm of command she'd used countless times in the ER. "No one's dying in my care tonight." The words caught in her throat, too similar to what she'd said that fatal night in room 412. But this was different. It had to be. She worked through the night, measuring time by the dwindling lamp oil and her patient's ragged breaths. The storm showed no sign of weakening, its fury rattling the cabin's wooden bones. Each gust of wind sent shadows dancing across the walls, and more than once Clara thought she saw figures moving in the darkness beyond the windows. The wound finally stopped bleeding around 3 a.m. Clara's hands shook as she tied off the last. Suture neat, even stitches that would have earned approval in her hospital days. She'd had to cut away his expensive shirt to work, revealing other scars beneath, old ones, speaking of a life more dangerous than his refined appearance suggested. His fever dreams grew worse as the night wore on. He called out names she didn't. No, argued with unseen enemies. Once, he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Julia," he said, his eyes wild. "I'm sorry, Julia. I tried to—" Then consciousness slipped away again, leaving Clara to wonder who Julia was and what role she played in this mystery. The contents of his pockets lay on her small table. The broken pocket watch, a leather wallet thick with bills she refused to count, and a silver money clip engraved with initials she couldn't make out in the dim light. No identification, she noted. A man running from something doesn't carry ID. Dawn approached, though the storm made it hard to tell. Clara's muscles ached from hours of tension, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The can of soup tempted her, but she held firm. He'd need it more when he woke. If he woke— She checked his pulse again. Stronger now, thank God. His breathing had steadied too, though the fever still raged. She'd used the last of her precious antibiotics, and now all she could do was wait. And pray, though she'd given that up months ago. The lamp sputtered, running dry. Clara lit a candle instead, conserving what little oil remained. In its gentle light, she studied her patient's face. Relaxed now in uneasy sleep, he was handsome. She could admit that clinically, like noting a patient's vital signs. Strong jaw, aristocratic nose, the kind of features that belonged in boardrooms or country clubs, not bleeding out in a mountain storm. Something crashed outside, a branch, she told herself, but her hands shook as she reached for the rifle. The noise came again, closer this time. Through the howling wind, she could have sworn she heard voices. Her patient stirred, muttering something about papers again. Clara laid a cool cloth on his forehead, checking the wound for what felt like the 100th time. No fresh bleeding. But the skin around the stitches was hot to the touch. The next few hours would be critical. "Well, Mr. Langston," she whispered, "looks like we're in this together now." She didn't know then how true those words would prove to be, or how much hung in the balance of this single night. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in that darkness, unknown forces were gathering. But for now, in the quiet space between life and death, there was only this: two lost souls found by chance or fate, waiting for morning. Dawn came and went, though you couldn't tell through the storm. Clara dozed fitfully in her chair beside Sawyer's makeshift bed, jerking awake at each change in his breathing. The torn photograph she'd found in his wallet lay on the table beside her, a sprawling ranch house backed by mountains, its edges worn as if frequently handled. Home, she guessed, or something he'd lost. No, wait, Sawyer mumbled, thrashing against the blankets. The deed, have to protect. His fever still raged, painting bright spots of color on his otherwise pale cheeks. Clara pressed a fresh cool cloth to his forehead, noting how his skin burned beneath her touch. Shh, she soothed, falling into the gentle rhythm she'd used with delirious patients in the ICU. You're safe here. A lie, maybe. Those noises outside hadn't been her imagination, but sometimes lies were kinder than truth. She'd learned that in the hospital. His eyes opened, fever-bright, but suddenly focused. Julia trusted me, he said, gripping Clara's wrist. Trusted me to keep it safe after... He broke off, coughing. Clara supported his head, helping him sip water, watching pain crease his features. The ranch, he continued, lost in memory or delirium. She left it all to me, but they're trying to... His voice faded, strength failing. Clara found herself leaning closer, drawn into the mystery despite her professional detachment. The photograph showed more than just the ranch house, she realized. There was a woman on the porch, her face turned away, long hair catching sunlight. Julia? The image was too worn to be sure, but something about the woman's stance suggested ownership, belonging. Sawyer's fever dreams painted fragments of a larger picture. A sister's death, corrupt officials, threatened foreclosure. Through his broken sentences, Clara pieced together a story of inheritance and betrayal. Her nursing instincts told her to ignore it. Delirious patients often spun fantasies, but the knife wound in his shoulder argued for truth. Have to warn the others, he muttered. Henderson's men, coming for the water rights. His words dissolved into incoherent mumbling, but Clara's mind caught on the name, Henderson. She'd heard it in town, whispered in the general store with equal parts fear and respect. Some kind of cattle baron turned land developer, buying up distressed properties across the territory. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and Clara thought she saw movement in the swirling snow. Her hand moved to the rifle, but the shadow, if it had been there, vanished. The storm was playing tricks on her tired mind. Had to be. She changed Sawyer's bandages, noting with relief that the wound showed no signs of spreading infection. Her last antibiotics were doing their work. His skin felt cooler too, the fever perhaps breaking. But experience had taught her that improvement could be deceptive. The photograph drew her attention again. Something about the angle nagged at her memory. She'd seen that view before, hadn't she? From the supply trail to town, there was a ranch that matched this one, though more weathered now. The Langston place, locals called it. Empty since the owner died. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. Sawyer Langston, Julia Langston. The pieces clicked into place. She'd heard the story in fragments during her supply runs. Julia Langston, the legendary rancher who'd held out against Henderson's expansion, found dead in a suspicious riding accident last spring, leaving everything. To her younger brother, Clara studied her patient's face with new eyes. No wonder he'd been running. No wonder someone had tried to silence him. If even half the rumors about Henderson were true... Sawyer stirred again, his hand catching hers. "Stay," he whispered, though she couldn't tell if he was speaking to her, or someone in his dreams. "Please, stay." "I'm here," she answered, surprising herself with how much she meant it. After months of isolation, of running from her own past, she'd forgotten how it felt to be needed. To have purpose. The photograph seemed to watch her from the table, its captured moment of happiness a stark contrast to this storm-wrapped present. Clara picked it up again, studying the woman on the porch. What secrets had Julia Langston taken? To her grave, and what would her killers do when they realized her brother had survived? The answers were out there in the storm. For now, though, Clara could only wait and watch and hope that when Sawyer Langston finally woke, he would trust her enough to tell her the truth. The land deed fell from Sawyer's coat as Clara was hanging, it to dry, its official seal catching the morning light. She hesitated before picking it up, her fingertips hovering over the elaborate letterhead. Patient confidentiality had been drilled into her for years, but this wasn't a hospital, and he wasn't technically her patient. Before she could decide, Sawyer's voice, clear for the first time in 24 hours, made her jump. "That's what they're after." He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Though I doubt they'll settle for just the paper now." Clara turned, medical training taking over. "Easy," she said, moving to support him. "You've lost a lot of blood." Their eyes met, and she saw none of the fever haze from before. Instead, there was a sharp intelligence that made her suddenly conscious of her worn clothes and unwashed hair. "How long?" he asked, taking in the cabin with a rancher's assessing gaze. "About 30 hours since I found you." She handed him water, noting how his hand shook slightly. "You've been in and out with fever. Said some interesting things." His expression tightened. "How interesting?" "Interesting enough to make me wonder if I should be expecting more violent visitors." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "The knife wound in your shoulder wasn't self-inflicted." Sawyer was silent. For a long moment, studying her face, Clara met his gaze steadily. She'd stared down drunk gang members in the ER. She could handle one wounded rancher's scrutiny. Finally, he sighed. "You saved my life. You deserve the truth." He reached for the deed, but Clara noticed how he checked the window first, scanning the snow-thick glass. "My sister Julia owned the biggest ranch in the territory. When she died," his jaw clenched, "was killed, she left everything to me, including the water rights Henderson's been trying to buy for years." "The developer?" Clara asked, though she knew. The name had haunted every conversation in town for months. "Developer, land thief, murder suspect if I can prove it." Sawyer's hand went to his shoulder. "His men caught up with me on the ridge. I got away, but—" He broke off, suddenly alert. "Did you hear that?" Clara shook her head. But then, yes. A crunch in the snow, too deliberate for falling branches. Her pulse quickened as she moved to the window. Through a break in the storm, she caught movement. Dark figures making their way up the supply trail. "They followed the blood trail," Sawyer said grimly. "Storm slowed them down, but didn't stop them." He tried to stand, swaying. "I have to go." You'll tear those stitches," Clara interrupted, pushing him back down, "and freeze to death if the blood loss doesn't kill you first." She surprised herself with the authority in her voice. "Besides, that's not the only trail to town." Sawyer stared at her. "Why would you help me? You don't know me, don't owe me anything." Clara thought of the newspaper clipping above her bed, of how quickly people had turned on her. "Let's say I know something about powerful men destroying lives to protect their interests." She managed a wry smile. "Besides, I took an oath. First, do no harm." "That's doctors," he corrected, but she saw the ghost of an answering smile. Close enough. She began gathering supplies, mind racing through options. "There's a back trail through the gorge. Dangerous in good weather. Suicide in this storm. They won't expect it." "You keep saying they." His voice was quiet. "You're coming with me." Clara looked around the cabin, her prison and sanctuary these past months. The newspaper clipping caught her eye, and suddenly she was tired of hiding. Tired of letting one mistake define her. "They've seen your tracks leading here," she said practically. "How long before they decide I know too much?" She stuffed medical supplies into her aunt's old leather bag. "Besides, you still need medical attention." Sawyer watched her pack, his expression unreadable. "It's not just Henderson," he said finally. "The water rights, the ranch, it's bigger than that. Corruption running through the whole territory. Julia found proof. Hid it before—" He stopped. "You'd be safer staying out of it." Clara thought of her last night at Chicago Memorial, of choosing the safe option, of a patient dying because she hadn't trusted her instincts. Never again. "Mr. Langston," she said, checking the bandages one last time, "I stopped being safe the moment I dragged you out of that snow." She handed him his coat, now mostly dry. "We should go, they're getting closer." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared fate. Whatever it was, it felt more real than anything. Clara had known since fleeing Chicago. Outside, the storm was finally breaking, but Clara knew the real tempest was just beginning. The threatening letter Clara found as she helped Sawyer pack was typed on expensive letterhead, its message brutally clear. "Final notice. Accept the offer by month's end, or the board will find your sister's death wasn't an accident after all." The paper trembled in her hands as implications clicked into place. "Henderson's reach extends into the medical board, doesn't it?" she asked, watching Sawyer's face. "The same people who suspended my license without a proper investigation." He took the letter, his expression darkening. Julia was investigating corruption in the territory's Water Rights Commission. She found connections, judges, medical administrators, business leaders, all taking bribes to help Henderson acquire land. He met her eyes. What exactly happened? "At Chicago Memorial." Clara's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "Patient died during my shift. Apparent medication error. But I'd reported staffing shortages the week before, warned about unsafe conditions. The hospital administrator—" She stopped, remembering. Henderson Medical Solutions had just bought the hospital. "Same playbook," Sawyer said grimly. "They create problems, then profit from the solutions." Julia found evidence, a sound outside. Cut him off. Boots crunching on snow, closer now. Clara moved quickly, grabbing essentials, the medical bag, what remained of her antibiotics, the last can of soup. Her hands shook as she pulled on layers of clothing, but her mind was surprisingly clear, like preparing for a complex surgery. Focus on the steps, not the consequences of failure. "The gorge trail," she whispered, leading him to the cabin's back door. "It's treacherous, but I've used it for gathering herbs. They won't know about it." Sawyer's wound had begun seeping again, a dark stain spreading on his makeshift bandage. Clara's professional eye noted how he favored his right side, how fever still brightened his eyes. He wasn't ready for this journey. But staying meant death, or worse, if Henderson's men decided to make an example of them. "Why didn't you just take their offer?" she asked, as they slipped out into the bitter cold. "Walk away with whatever they offered for the ranch?" His laugh was harsh in the frozen air. "Julia died protecting more than just land. She found proof of what they've been doing, dozens of cases like yours, people's lives destroyed to clear the way for Henderson's empire." He helped her over a fallen log, his hand steady despite his injury. "The evidence is hidden at the ranch. If I can reach it—" A gunshot cracked the morning silence. They froze, but the sound had come from the front of the cabin. Their hunters, growing impatient. "They'll break in soon," Clara murmured, guiding them toward a nearly invisible trail between snow-laden pines. "Find our tracks." How long to reach town through the gorge? 6 hours in good weather. In this, she shook her head. "If we make it by nightfall, we're lucky." "If?" His eyebrow raised, but she saw the ghost of a smile. Better odds than facing Henderson's men. Another shot rang out, followed by the sound of splintering wood. "They're in! Run!" They plunged into the forest, snow drowning their footsteps. Clara led them down a steep incline, using trees for support. Behind them, voices shouted in discovery and anger. The chase was on. "You could still turn back," Sawyer said, as they paused for breath in a small hollow. "Tell them I forced you to help me. They might—" "Stop." Clara checked his bandage, frowning at the fresh blood. "I've spent 8 months hiding from what happened in Chicago, believing I deserved what they did to me." She met his gaze. "Your sister died fighting these people. I won't insult her memory by running away." Something changed in his expression then. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Julia would have liked you. Tell me about her." Clara said as they started moving again. "While we walk, keep your mind off the pain." So he did, painting a picture of a fierce woman who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd faced down corrupt officials and hired thugs with equal determination, who died trying to expose a truth too dangerous to ignore. They were halfway down the gorge trail when they heard the dogs. Clara's heart seized. She hadn't counted on them bringing trackers. Beside her, Sawyer tensed. "They're not going to." "Stop," he said quietly. "No." Clara squared her shoulders, remembering other impossible situations in the ER. "But neither are we." The storm was gathering strength again, which might buy them time. But as they pushed deeper into the wilderness, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would end in one of two ways: with justice finally served, or with two more mysterious accidents in Henderson's growing list of victims. She was determined it wouldn't be the latter. Clara's mother's locket bounced against her chest as they scrambled down the treacherous gorge path, its familiar weight now a reminder of everything she'd lost, and everything she might still regain. The old silver piece had been her good luck charm during countless emergency room shifts. Now it felt warm against her skin despite the bitter cold. "Wait," she whispered, pulling Sawyer behind an outcropping as voices echoed off the canyon walls. The dogs' barking had grown fainter, thrown off by the strengthening storm, but their pursuers were still too close. Sawyer's breathing was labored, his skin hot under her checking fingers. The wound was bleeding again, and she could see exhaustion pulling at his features. "We need to find shelter," she murmured. "Your fever's rising." "Can't stop," he managed, though she could feel him trembling with effort. "They'll die if we don't," she finished firmly, "and all your sister's evidence dies with you." Her nurse's eye hadn't missed the subtle signs of deterioration. Without rest and fresh bandages, he wouldn't make it to town, let alone his ranch. The storm was picking up again, driving sheets of snow between the towering cliff walls. Clara squinted through the whiteness, searching for a darker shadow in the rock face, maybe 20 yards down. She'd seen caves in these cliffs during her herb-gathering expeditions. "This way," she supported more of his weight as they picked their way down the slope. The cave entrance was narrow, easily missed if you didn't know where to look. Inside, it opened into a space just big enough for two people, sheltered from the wind. Clara helped Sawyer sit against the rough wall, then dug through her medical bag for fresh bandages. The locket swung forward as she worked, catching his attention. "Family." "Heirloom?" he asked, voice tight with pain as she examined his wound. "Mother's. She was a nurse too." Clara's fingers worked automatically, cleaning and rebandaging. "Died when I was 19, cancer. Nothing anyone could do but watching her fade." She swallowed hard. "That's why I became an ER nurse. Wanted to be where I could actually save people, until they took that away too." His hand caught hers, surprisingly warm despite everything, "like they took Julia from me." The parallel hung between them as Clara finished with the bandages. Outside, the storm howled, but in here time seemed to slow. She found herself studying his face in the dim light, the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, despite everything he'd endured. "Tell me about the night it happened," he said quietly. "In Chicago." Clara's fingers went to the locket. An old habit. Short-staffed again, third time that week. I'd been on 18 hours, but they needed me for another 6. The memories rushed back, sharp as broken glass. The patient was critical. Car accident. I checked the medication 3 times. I know I did. But somehow... She stopped, throat tight. "Somehow the wrong dose was recorded," Sawyer finished. "And the security footage from the medication room was accidentally erased." She looked at him sharply. "How did you—" "Same thing happened at 3 other hospitals Henderson bought. Create a crisis, force out experienced staff, replace them with cheaper contractors." His voice was bitter. "Julia found the pattern. She was building a case, but they got to her first. A particularly strong gust rattled loose stones at the cave entrance." Clara shivered, as much from memory as cold. Sawyer shifted, wrapping his good arm around her shoulders. The gesture was protective, instinctive, and somehow completely natural. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "About Julia. I'm sorry about your career." His voice was soft. "But Clara, watching you work, seeing how you handle crisis, they didn't destroy you. They just made you stronger." She turned to face him, struck by the quiet conviction in his words. Their faces were very close now, shared warmth in the freezing cave. Clara felt something shift between them, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "We're going to expose them," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "All of it. The hospital takeovers, Julia's murder, the water rights corruption. We." His eyes searched hers. "You need a partner in this fight." She touched the locket, thinking of her mother's strength, her own lost purpose finally refound. "And I need to stop hiding from who I am." The moment stretched, filled with unspoken understanding. Then, slowly, inevitably, Sawyer's hand came, up to cup her cheek. Clara felt her heart skip as he leaned closer. A dog barked suddenly near. They froze, the moment shattered. Reality crashed back with the sound of voices approaching through the storm. They weren't safe yet, but as Clara helped Sawyer to his feet, preparing to run again, she knew something had changed. They were no longer just two wounded souls fleeing separate demons. Now they were fighting back, together back. Sawyer's family ring glinted in the fading light as he helped Clara across a half-frozen stream, its sapphire stone dark as storm clouds. "My father's," he explained, catching her glance. "He built the ranch from nothing, taught Julia everything she knew about running it, about standing up to men like Henderson." The ring caught on Clara's sleeve as she stumbled, exhaustion making her clumsy. They'd been moving for hours, taking the most treacherous paths to throw off the dogs. Her medical training screamed at her to make Sawyer rest. His fever was climbing again, but the occasional distant bark kept them pushing forward. "Your father would be proud," she said, helping him over a fallen log. "Of both of you." The words brought a shadow to his face. "He died 2 years ago. Heart attack, they said." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "Now I wonder." Henderson had already started buying up neighboring ranches by then. Clara checked their surroundings, a habit now, before responding. How many others? How many accidents before Julia started investigating? Too many. The Wilsons' place. Foreclosed after their son's farming accident. Matthew's ranch sold cheap after their mysterious fire. He stopped, breathing heavy. Julia kept records of everything. Names, dates, patterns nobody else noticed. They paused in a small clearing. Clara insisting on checking his wound. The bandage was soaked through again, and his skin burned under her touch. "We need to stop soon," she said quietly. "You can't." A branch snapped nearby. They both froze. Through the trees, shadows moved, men with rifles far too close. Clara's heart hammered as Sawyer pulled her behind a broad pine trunk. His body shielded hers, warm despite everything. She could feel his heartbeat, too fast with fever and fear. The ring pressed between them, its weight somehow grounding. For a moment they barely breathed, voices carried on the wind. "Tracks lead this way. Can't be far. Boss wants Langston alive if possible." Clara felt Sawyer tense. His good hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing once. The gesture said everything. "Trust me, stay quiet, we'll get through this." The men moved closer. Clara counted footsteps. 3, maybe 4 sets. One of them passed so near she could smell tobacco smoke. Her fingers tightened on Sawyer's. A dog barked excitedly, but further down the valley. The men moved away, following the false trail. Only when their voices faded did Clara release her breath. "That was too close," she whispered. Sawyer didn't move back immediately, and she found she didn't want him to. His presence felt right somehow, safe despite everything. "Clara," his voice was rough, "if something happens, if they catch up to us," he worked the ring off his finger. "Take this. Get to the ranch. In my father's study, there's a hidden compartment behind the portrait. Julia's evidence." "Stop!" She pushed the ring back toward him. "We're both making it. I didn't save your life just to lose you now." Their eyes met in the dim light. Something shifted in his expression. Wonder, maybe, or recognition. His hand came up to touch her cheek, and this time there were no dogs to interrupt. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant. Clara felt it down to her soul, healing and hope and possibility, all wrapped in one brief moment. When they parted, Sawyer rested his forehead against hers. "I thought I was alone in this fight," he murmured. "After Julia, I couldn't see her." Way forward, Clara touched the ring on his finger, thinking of all they'd lost and all they might still save. "You're not alone anymore." She managed a small smile. "Besides, you still need a nurse." As if to prove her point, he swayed slightly. The fever was taking its toll, and night was falling fast. They needed shelter, but the caves were too obvious. "Now, there's an old line shack," Sawyer said, reading her concern. "About 2 miles ahead. Used it during roundups before—" He didn't need to finish. Before Henderson's men had started their campaign of terror, Clara shouldered more of his. "Wait," as they started moving again. The ring caught the last light as he gestured toward a barely visible trail. Such a small thing to carry so much history. A father's legacy, a sister's fight for justice, and now perhaps a future neither of them had dared imagine this morning. Behind them, a dog howled. Closer again. Clara felt Sawyer straighten beside her, drawing on reserves of strength she knew were nearly depleted. But she also felt his determination matching her own. They had something worth fighting for now. Each other. The truth. And maybe, if they survived the night, a chance to right the wrongs that had brought them together. The storm was gathering strength again as they disappeared into the deepening shadows. 2 hearts beating as one against the growing dark. The broken window in the line shack's north wall let in fingers of icy wind, its jagged edges telling a story Clara didn't want to read. The glass hadn't broken from weather. The pattern was wrong, the impact point deliberate. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't bothered with the door. "They're sweeping all the shelters," Sawyer said quietly, checking his wound in the dim light. Methodical, professional. His fever had spiked again during their final push to reach the shack, and Clara could see him fighting to stay focused. Secured the door with a length of rope. It wouldn't hold against a determined attack, but it might buy them warning. The shack was a single room, sparse but dry. A pot-bellied stove squatted in one corner, a narrow cot in another. Signs of recent intrusion were everywhere. Scattered supplies, overturned furniture, boot prints in the dust. Here, she helped Sawyer to the cot, her practiced hands already reaching for fresh bandages. "Let me check." The window exploded inward. Clara reacted on pure instinct, dragging Sawyer to the floor as glass rained around them. A bullet thudded into the wall where they'd been standing. Someone outside shouted, "Movement inside!" "Back door," Sawyer gasped. But Clara had already seen the problem. It was blocked by fallen shelving, probably from the earlier search. They were trapped. More voices outside. "Remember, Henderson wants him alive." Footsteps crunched on broken glass. The woman's expendable. Clara's heart hammered, but her mind stayed crystalline clear. The same clarity she'd found during hospital emergencies. She scanned the room, cataloguing options with clinical precision. The stovepipe, yes. "Can you stand?" she whispered to Sawyer. When he nodded, she helped him up, keeping them low. "The pipe leads to a chimney. If we can reach the roof—" A bullet splintered the doorframe. Clara pulled Sawyer behind an overturned table as boots thudded on the porch. She could hear at least 3 men, probably more, surrounding the shack. "Langston," a deep voice called. "Make this easy on yourself. Henderson's offering you a deal. Walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. All you have to do is sign over the water rights." Sawyer's laugh was harsh, like Julia's accident was a deal. His voice was weak but carried. "Tell Henderson he can—" Another shot cut him off, this one punching through the thin wall inches from Clara's head. She felt Sawyer try to shield her, but she pushed him toward the stove instead. "Up!" she hissed. "Now!" The pipe was old but seemed solid. Clara boosted Sawyer up first, supporting his injured side as he struggled onto the flat portion near the ceiling. His face was grey with pain, but his eyes burned with determination. "Miss Monroe!" The voice outside had changed, become silkily reasonable. "We know about Chicago, about the unfortunate incident at the hospital. Henderson has friends on the medical board. Help us with Langston, and your license can be reinstated. All charges dropped." Clara froze halfway up the pipe, the words hitting like physical blows. Her license, her career, everything she'd worked for, offered back. Clara. Sawyer's voice was soft, meant for her alone. When she looked up, she saw in his eyes everything they'd shared since that snowy night. Trust, understanding, and something deeper neither had dared name yet. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Tell Henderson he can take his deal," she called out, voice steady, "and shove it up his—" The door burst open. Clara scrambled up the pipe as bullets filled the air below. Sawyer helped pull her onto the roof just as boots thundered into the shack. The night air hit like a slap, but they had no time to feel it. Clara heard shouts of discovery below, feet pounding toward the back door. The roof sloped down toward a snowbank on the far side. Their only chance. Together? Sawyer's hand found hers in the darkness. Clara squeezed once. Together. They jumped just as figures emerged from the shack. The snow cushioned their fall, but Sawyer's grunt of pain told her his wound had torn open again. Behind. In them angry voices and running feet. "The trees!" she gasped, hauling him up. "If we can reach—" A bullet kicked up snow by their feet, then another, closer. Clara felt the heat of it pass her cheek. No warning shots this time. They were shooting. To kill. They plunged into the forest's darkness, branches whipping past. Clara's world narrowed to the essentials. Sawyer's labored breathing beside her, the crunch of pursuit behind, the desperate need to keep moving. She'd made her choice. Chosen truth over lies, justice over safety, love over fear. Now they just had to survive it. The broken window of the line shack faded into darkness behind them, another marker on their journey toward either salvation or destruction. Only the dawn would tell which. The hidden rifle Clara discovered wrapped in oilcloth beneath a fallen log was a gift from fate, or perhaps Julia's ghost. Sawyer recognized it immediately, his face tight with pain and memory. Julia's. She kept caches like this throughout. The property. Never trusted Henderson's men not to try something at roundup time. Clara checked the weapon with shaking hands, remembering her aunt's basic lessons. The rifle was old but well-maintained, loaded and ready. Behind them, dogs bayed. In the darkness, closer now. Sawyer's fever burned against her side where she supported him, and fresh blood darkened his bandages. "You need to go on alone," he said, voice rough. "The ranch is 3 miles east. Father's study. If you suggest splitting up one more time—" Clara cut him off. "I'm going to sedate you." The threat brought a weak smile to his pale face. "We need shelter, somewhere to treat that wound properly." "There's a hunting blind," he managed between labored breaths. "Half-mile ahead. Julia and I used to—" He broke off, coughing. The sound echoed in the still air, and the dog's barking changed pitch in response. Clara helped him forward, one step at a time. The rifle slung across her back felt both foreign and necessary, like so many things in her life, since finding him in the snow. The moon broke through briefly, turning the forest into a maze of silver and shadow. "Tell me about Julia," she said, keeping him focused, moving. "About the ranch, growing up here. She was unstoppable. 10 years older, raised me after Mom died." His voice was fading, but he pushed on. "Taught me everything. Riding, tracking, standing up for what's right. When Henderson started buying up water rights, forcing foreclosures, she was the only one who saw the pattern." A branch cracked behind them. Clara froze, listening. The dogs were closer, but not yet upon them. She guided them toward thicker. Uncover, trying to remember everything her aunt had taught her about moving quietly through snow. "The hunting blind," she whispered. "Which way?" Sawyer gestured weakly toward a rise ahead. Clara could just make out the darker shape of a platform in the trees. Getting him up there would be the real challenge. They were halfway there when the first flashlight beam cut through the trees. Clara's heart jumped as voices carried on the wind. "Tracks here! Blood drops! They're close!" The blind was crude, but solid, a platform wedged between three massive pines, reachable by a rough ladder of boards nailed to the trunk. Clara helped Sawyer up first, every grunt of pain shooting straight to her heart. The effort left him shaking, barely conscious. She pulled herself up after him, rifle clattering softly against the wooden slats. The platform was just big enough for two, with low walls for cover. A perfect defensive position, if it came to that. "Stay with me," she murmured, checking his wound. The stitches had torn, as she'd feared. She pulled supplies from her bag, working, by touch in the darkness. Her fingers remembered what her eyes couldn't see, the product of countless emergency procedures during blackouts and disasters. Sawyer's hand found hers as she finished rebandaging. "Clara," his voice was barely a whisper. "What you did back there, refusing their offer, wasn't a choice." She squeezed his fingers gently. "They destroyed my career trying to hide their corruption. They killed your sister for exposing it." She settled the rifle across her lap, its weight somehow reassuring. "I'm done running, done hiding." His other hand came up to cup her cheek, and even through his fever, his touch sparked something electric between them. When he kissed her this time, it held none of the hesitation of their first embrace. It was a promise, a declaration, a joining of purposes as much as hearts. A dog barked directly below their position. They broke apart, reality crashing back. Clara raised the rifle, her aunt's lessons surfacing. "Breathe steady, squeeze don't. Pull, wait for a clear shot." "Rather touching," a voice called from the darkness. "The disgraced nurse and the grieving brother, finding love on the run." The speaker stepped into a shaft of moonlight. A tall man in an expensive coat, flanked by armed figures. "Unfortunately, this little romance has gone on long enough." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger, but Sawyer's hand on her arm stopped her. Too many targets, too little light. They'd have one chance, if that. "Henderson sends his regards," the man continued, "and a message. The easy way is no longer an option." In the distance, thunder rolled, or perhaps it was an avalanche, nature itself joining the fight. Clara felt Sawyer straighten beside her, drawing on some final reserve of strength. The night stretched wire-tight around them, waiting for someone to make the first move. The map of mountain passes, worn and water-stained, spilled from Sawyer's coat as they pressed against the blind's rough wall. Even in the dim moonlight, Clara could make out Julia's handwriting in the margins. Emergency route, avalanche risk, last resort only. The irony wasn't lost on her. 4 men below, Sawyer whispered, his fever-bright eyes scanning the shadows. "Maybe more in the trees. They'll try to wait us out." "That's not an option." Clara checked his bandage again. The bleeding had slowed, but his skin burned hotter than ever. Without proper medical attention soon, she pushed the thought away. Focusing on the map, Julia marked something here, a ravine system leading to Langston. The man in the expensive coat called up. "One last chance, the deed for your lives. Henderson's reasonable, he doesn't want more accidents." "Bad for business." Clara felt Sawyer tense beside her. "Like Julia's accident?" he shouted back, voice stronger than she'd expected. "Tell Henderson I know what really happened that day. Tell him I found her journal." The silence that followed was heavy with significance. Clara watched the men below shift uneasily, exchanging glances. Even their leader seemed thrown off balance. "The journal," Sawyer whispered to her, so soft she barely heard. "In the study, everything she uncovered, names, dates, proof of Henderson's whole operation. That's what they're really after." A bullet thudded into the blind's wall, sending splinters flying. "Enough games." The leader's composed mask had cracked. "Take them. Henderson can sort it out later." Clara raised the rifle as dark figures started climbing. The first shot went wide, but her second caught a branch near a climber's head, sending him scrambling back. Her aunt would have been proud. "The ravine," Sawyer urged, pointing to the map. "If we can reach it—" Another shot. Closer, Clara heard. The crackle of radio static below. They were calling for backup. "Last magazine," she reported, checking the rifle. 3 rounds left. Not enough. Sawyer's hand found hers in the darkness. Together, together. The next moments passed in a blur of action. Clara's last shots provided cover as they swung down the far side of the tree, hidden from their attackers. Sawyer stumbled on the landing, but she caught him. Behind them, shouts of discovery turned to confusion as they vanished into the shadows. The map had shown a steep decline leading to the ravine. In daylight, it would have been treacherous. In darkness, it was nearly suicide. But they had no choice. "Hold. Onto me," Clara ordered, taking more of Sawyer's weight. The first step nearly sent them tumbling, but she found their balance. The second step was easier. The third, a bullet kicked up snow beside them. They were silhouetted against the moonlit slope, perfect targets. "Run," Sawyer gasped. "Don't stop." They half ran, half slid down the incline, every step a prayer. Clara's world narrowed to the essentials. Sawyer's ragged breathing, the crunch of pursuit above, the desperate need to keep moving. The map had shown a river at the bottom of the ravine. If they could reach it, a roar filled the air, not thunder this time. Clara looked up to see snow starting to move on the slope above their pursuers. The gunshots had done what nature had been waiting to do. "Avalanche!" someone screamed. The sound was lost in the growing thunder of moving snow. Clara pulled Sawyer toward an outcropping of rock, her nurse's training warring with her instinct to run. Above them, Henderson's men scattered, but the avalanche was faster. White death. Channeled by the ravine walls, swept down like judgment. They pressed into a hollow beneath the outcropping as the world dissolved into chaos. The cold was absolute, the noise overwhelming. Clara felt Sawyer's arms around her, protecting her even now. They held each other as the avalanche roared past, taking their pursuers with it. Seconds stretched to minutes. When the thunder finally faded, they emerged to find the landscape transformed. The ravine was filled with packed snow, the forest above forever changed. No sign remained of Henderson's men. "Julia knew," Sawyer said softly, looking at the map in wonder. "She marked this route knowing someday, knowing the mountain itself might have to pass judgment." Clara helped him up, noting how he leaned more heavily on her now. The ranch was still miles away and dawn was coming. Henderson would send more men once he learned what happened here. But as they started down the changed ravine, following Julia's marked path, Clara felt something she hadn't since Chicago. Hope. They had survived the impossible. They had chosen. Justice over safety, love over fear, and somewhere ahead, in a hidden compartment behind a portrait, waited the truth that would bring down an empire built on lies. They just had to reach it. The key to Sawyer's ranch hung heavy in Clara's hand as they approached the old foreman's cabin, its brass surface worn smooth by years of use. "Closer than the main house," Sawyer explained through chattering teeth, "and Henderson's men won't expect—" He stumbled, strength finally failing. Clara caught him, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. The trek through the ravine had taken hours, each step a battle against exhaustion and Sawyer's worsening condition. Dawn painted the mountains. Gold behind them, but brought no warmth. The cabin door stuck, swollen with winter damp. Clara had to throw her shoulder against it twice before it gave. Inside, dust motes danced in the pale light, but the space was clean, well-maintained. A refuge, she realized, prepared for exactly this kind of emergency, Julia insisted. Sawyer mumbled as she helped him to a narrow bed. Always having backup plans. His eyes were glassy with fever, his wound hot to the touch when Clara checked. "Stay with me," she ordered. Finding emergency supplies in a cabinet, antibiotics, fresh bandages, even an IV kit. More of Julia's foresight. "We didn't make it this far for you to quit now." Working quickly, Clara set up the IV, her hospital training taking over. The antibiotics were newer than her expired ones. Julia had rotated the supplies regularly. As she cleaned and redressed Sawyer's wound, her mind raced through their options. The main ranch house was visible through the cabin's window, half a mile across open ground. Henderson's remaining men would be watching it, waiting. The evidence they needed, Julia's journal, lay hidden somewhere inside. Behind the portrait, Sawyer said, reading her thoughts. Father's study, north wall. He tried to sit up, but fell back, weak as a kitten. Have to, before Henderson, rest. Clara pressed him back gently. The antibiotics need time to work. We're safe for the moment. His hand caught hers, fingers curling around the key. Not safe. Never safe until... His voice faded as exhaustion finally claimed him. Clara watched him sleep, her heart aching. In the soft morning light, his face looked younger, the weight of vengeance and loss temporarily lifted. She touched his cheek, allowing herself to acknowledge what she'd known since the cave. She was falling in love with him, not just his cause or his courage, but him. A glint of metal caught her eye. Behind a loose board in the ceiling, Julia had hidden a small cache, ammunition, money, and a sealed envelope with Sawyer's name. Clara left it untouched. Some secrets weren't hers to uncover. She used the cabin's ancient radio to check the weather. The storm had passed, but another was building. By nightfall, the mountains would be wrapped in snow again. Their window of opportunity was narrow. Moving quietly, Clara explored the cabin. Julia's presence was everywhere. In the carefully stocked supplies, the detailed maps on the walls, the emergency procedures written in her clear hand. She'd known this day might come, had prepared for it in 100 small ways. Your brother's alive, Clara whispered to the empty air. He's going to finish what you started. A floorboard creaked behind her. Clara spun, reaching for the rifle, but it was only Sawyer, awake and more alert. The IV bag was nearly empty, modern medicine doing its work. You should be resting, she scolded, moving to help him. Been resting too long. His voice was stronger, though he leaned on her as they walked to the window. Henderson's men will be here by nightfall. They'll expect us to wait for dark, try to sneak in. Clara studied the ranch house, her nurse's mind cataloguing his vital signs even as she considered strategy. So we don't wait. No. A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. Julia always said the best defense is a strong offense. Henderson thinks he has us running scared. He won't expect us to walk in the front door. In broad daylight? Clara raised an eyebrow. That's either brilliant or suicidal. Bit of both, maybe. He turned to face her, his eyes clear despite the fever. Clara, you don't have to. She silenced him with a kiss, brief but fierce. I thought we settled this. We're in it together. Something shifted in his expression, hope maybe, or wonder. The key pressed between their joined hands, a promise and a challenge. The journal isn't just names and dates, he said quietly. It's evidence of everything. The hospital takeovers, the forced foreclosures, Julia's murder. Enough to bring down Henderson's entire empire. And clear my name, and clear your name. Clara looked out at the ranch house, remembering Chicago, remembering all that had been taken from them both. The key felt warmer now, like it had absorbed their shared purpose. Then, let's go get it. Clara's nursing pin caught the morning light. As she fastened it to her collar, a small act of defiance, reclaiming her identity. The gold caduceus was tarnished now, like her reputation, but its weight was familiar, grounding. She'd worn it the night everything fell apart in Chicago. Now she'd wear it for what might be her last act as a healer, helping to excise the corruption that had wounded so many lives. Ready? Sawyer asked, checking Julia's rifle one final time. The antibiotics had helped, but Clara could see the cost of every movement in the tight lines around his eyes. They had one chance at this. After that, Henderson's men will be watching the roads, she said, adjusting his bandage, expecting us to wait for dark. Which is why we're taking Julia's trail. He nodded toward a barely visible path leading through the horse pasture. She used it to check fence lines, leads right to the study window. They moved in daylight, Bold as you please. Clara's heart hammered, but her hands were steady. The main house grew larger with each step, a sprawling ranch home that spoke of generations of honest work, now surrounded by Henderson's corruption. Like rot in healthy wood, a pickup truck was parked out front, two men lounging against it. Guards, but watching the wrong approach. Clara and Sawyer kept to the morning shadows of the outbuildings, Julia's path providing perfect cover. There, Sawyer whispered, indicating a ground-floor window partially hidden by an overgrown rose bush. Julia's roses. She planted them for cover, same as everything else she did. Clara helped him ease the window open, noting how his shoulder wound had started seeping again. The antibiotics were wearing off. Time was their enemy now in more ways than one. They slipped inside, into what had once been a handsome study, book-lined, walls, leather furniture, the kind of room where important decisions were made over generations. A large portrait dominated one wall, Sawyer and Julia's father, stern-faced but with kind eyes. "Behind the frame," Sawyer said, moving toward it. "Julia showed me once, but never told me what she kept." "Well, isn't this touching?" Henderson himself stepped from behind the door, flanked by armed men. "The prodigal son returns." Clara's blood froze. The developer was exactly as she'd imagined from Chicago. Expensive suit, manicured hands, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. The kind of man who'd destroy lives and call it business. "You're earlier than expected," Henderson continued conversationally. "We thought you'd try something foolishly heroic after dark. But then, the Langstons always did have a habit of surprising me, just like your sister." Sawyer's hand tightened on the rifle, but Henderson's men already had them covered. No clean shots, no easy escape. "What did Julia find?" Clara asked, playing for time, noting exits and angles with her nurse's eye for detail. "What was worth killing for?" Henderson's smile widened fractionally. "Ah, Nurse Monroe, I was hoping you'd survive the avalanche. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down later." He adjusted his cuffs, a businessman's nervous tell. "As for what Julia found, let's just say some water rights are worth more than others. Especially when there's gold involved." "The survey reports," Sawyer breathed. "That's why you wanted the ranch so badly. The water tables show significant gold deposits, yes. Quite the inheritance Julia was sitting on. Shame about her riding." "Accident." Henderson sighed theatrically. "And now history repeats itself. 2 more tragic accidents in the mountains. Very dangerous country." Clara's fingers found her nursing pin, its edges sharp against her skin. "You really think you can keep hiding the truth? About Julia, about Chicago, about all of it?" "My dear, I've been hiding truths since before you were born. One more tragic story won't—" The portrait exploded outward. Julia's last surprise, a shotgun blast from within the wall itself, triggered by some mechanism Clara couldn't see. Henderson's men scattered as wood and canvas rained down. In the chaos, Clara saw what Julia had hidden, not just a journal, but a safe stuffed with documents, photographs, recordings, everything they needed, everything Henderson feared. Sawyer moved with startling speed for a wounded man, scooping up fallen papers even as he fired Julia's rifle. Clara grabbed what she could reach, her nursing pin cutting into her palm as she clutched the evidence. "Kill them!" Henderson's voice cracked with rage. "Kill them both!" The study dissolved into gunfire and breaking glass. Clara felt Sawyer pull her toward the window as bullets chewed the walls around them. Her pin drew blood now, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was alive. It meant they still had a chance. They just had to survive the next few minutes to use it. Clara's new medical license arrived by courier the same day Henderson was arrested. She held the crisp document in trembling hands, its gold seal catching the morning light streaming through the ranch house windows. 3 months had passed since the desperate escape from the study, but sometimes she still woke expecting to find herself back in that frozen cabin, alone with her ghosts. "The board's official apology is rather understated," Sawyer said, reading over her shoulder. His wound had healed clean. leaving only a slight stiffness that Clara suspected had more to do with memories than medicine. Considering they were facing criminal charges for conspiracy, due to new evidence, the suspension is lifted with the board's deepest regrets, Clara read aloud, tasting the sweetness of vindication. Amazing what Julia's recordings of Henderson's hospital board meetings accomplished. The evidence they'd seized that day had been devastating. Photographs, account, ledgers, recorded conversations. Julia had spent years building her case, documenting every aspect of Henderson's empire. The water rights corruption had been just the beginning. Hospital takeovers, forced foreclosures, suspicious deaths, all connected, all methodically detailed. In her hidden files, she knew they'd come for her eventually. Sawyer's voice was soft. He stood at the study window where new glass had replaced what shattered during their escape. The rose bushes were budding again, promise of renewal. She made sure the truth wouldn't die with her. Clara joined him, remembering their desperate flight from the study. They'd made it to the sheriff's office in town, Henderson's men close behind. But Julia's evidence had spoken louder than any threats or bribes. Within hours, federal agents were swarming the territory. Henderson's arrest had made national news. His empire was crumbling, taking corrupt officials with it in a cascade of indictments. Clara's case had been just one thread in a tapestry of systematic corruption, but its unraveling had helped expose the whole pattern. The hospital board chairman confessed everything, she said, touching her reinstated license. How Henderson arranged my suspension to discredit any investigation into their practices. The patient's death was caused by tampered equipment, not medication error. They needed a scapegoat. Sawyer's arm slipped around her waist, warm and solid. Someone ethical enough to notice problems, dedicated enough to report them. Someone they thought they could break. Clara leaned into him, remembering darker days. They didn't count on me finding allies. His kiss was gentle, full of shared understanding. They'd both been wounded by Henderson's machinations, both lost pieces of themselves. But in finding each other, they'd found the strength to fight. Begad, the license represented more than just cleared names and restored careers. It was a symbol of justice served, of truth winning out over corruption. Clara had already accepted a position at the local clinic where her emergency room experience was desperately needed. The territory's medical care would no longer be controlled by Henderson's profit margins. Julia would be proud, she said softly, of all of this. She'd be proud of you, Sawyer corrected. You could have taken Henderson's offer that night in the cabin, gotten your license back the easy way. There was no easy way. Clara touched the nursing pin on her collar, no longer a reminder of shame, but a badge of honor. Only right and wrong. They stood together, watching spring sunlight paint the mountains gold. The ranch was coming back to life after Henderson's shadow, fences mended, cattle returning to pastures, honest work replacing corrupt schemes. Clara's medical skills had found new purpose here, healing both bodies and trust in the community. No, Sawyer said thoughtfully. The foreman's cabin is going to waste. It'd make a good clinic space, being closer to town. Clara looked at him sharply. The cabin where you saved my life. Again, his smile held promise. Seems fitting to turn it into a place of healing. The idea felt right, transforming their refuge into something permanent, something good, like Julia's roses blooming again, beauty growing. From broken ground, Henderson's sentencing is next week, she said, changing subjects but not theme. They're expecting both of us to testify, together. His hand found hers. Together. The license caught another flash of sunlight, like a benediction. Clara thought of that desperate night in the snow, how close she'd come to giving up. But fate, or Julia's guiding hand, had led her to exactly where she needed to be. She was home. She was healing, and she was loved. Some wounds, she'd learned, could only be mended by fighting for what was right. Some hearts could only be healed by finding someone worth fighting beside. The wedding band glowed warm in the afternoon light as Clara turned it in her fingers, its simple gold circle representing so much more than just marriage. Engraved inside were 2 dates, the night she'd found Sawyer in the snow, and today, exactly 1 year later. Through the chapel window, she could see the mountains where their story had begun, white peaks sharp against blue sky. Julia would have loved this, Sarah, the pastor's wife, said, as she helped Clara with her dress. The same woman who'd once offered food to a struggling exile was now adjusting a bride's veil. She always said Sawyer needed someone as strong as he was stubborn. The ceremony would be small, family they'd chosen rather than been born to. The federal marshals who'd helped bring Henderson down, the clinic staff who'd welcomed Clara with open arms, the ranchers who'd testified about Henderson's corruption, helping justice finally prevail. Henderson's sentencing had come down yesterday, 30 years, no possibility of parole. His empire had crumbled completely, its ruins revealing decades of corruption. But from those ashes, something new was growing. Ready? Sarah asked, adding a sprig of Julia's roses to Clara's bouquet. Clara touched the ring once more before slipping it into her pocket for the ceremony. Its weight reminded her of everything that had brought them here: danger and healing, trust and redemption, love born in darkness but blooming in light. The small chapel had been Julia's favorite place to think, Sawyer had told her. He'd found her here often during the months she was building her case against Henderson. Now it would be where her brother found his happiness, a fitting tribute to her memory. Clara heard murmurs from the gathered guests, then the first notes of music, not the traditional wedding march, but an old folk song about healing and hope. Through the doorway, she could see Sawyer waiting at the altar, straight and tall, in his father's restored suit. The shoulder wound had healed completely now, leaving only scars that matched the ones they both carried inside, marks of survival, not weakness. The clinic in the converted foreman's cabin was thriving, bringing medical care to a community that had too long gone without. Clara's emergency room experience had proved invaluable during spring floods and summer wildfires. She'd earned trust the same way she'd earned love, by standing firm, fighting for what was right, healing what was broken. Last chance to run, Sarah teased, adjusting the veil one final time. Clara smiled, remembering a different kind of running, through snow and darkness, toward rather than away. "I stopped running the night I found him," she said softly. "Everything since then has been about standing ground." The music shifted, her cue approaching. Through the chapel's windows, she could see the ranch spreading out below, no longer a symbol of corruption, but of redemption. The water rights that Henderson had killed for now supported a community trust, ensuring small ranchers would never again face the pressure that had destroyed so many lives. Julia's roses climbed the chapel walls, early blooms adding their sweet scent to the air. Even here, her presence watched over them. The journal that had brought down Henderson's empire was now evidence in a dozen other cases, her meticulous documentation helping prosecutors unravel similar schemes across the country. "I didn't believe in happy endings," Clara admitted, taking her bouquet. "Not after Chicago, not after everything." "Happiness isn't an ending," Sarah corrected gently. "It's a choice you make every day, like justice, like healing." The music swelled. Time to begin. Clara touched the ring in her pocket one last time, feeling its promise. Through the chapel doors she saw Sawyer turn toward her, his face lighting with the same wonder she'd seen that first night when she'd dragged him from the snow. They'd chosen this date deliberately, 1 year from when fate or chance had brought them together. 1 year of fighting for truth, rebuilding what corruption had tried to destroy, falling more deeply in love with each challenge faced together. The ring would bind them officially, but Clara knew their real joining had happened long ago. In a storm-wrapped cabin, in a cave hiding from pursuers, in 100 moments of choosing each other over fear. The gold band was just a symbol of what they'd already proven, that some loves were strong enough to overcome any darkness. As the music reached its peak, and the chapel doors opened fully. Clara took her first step toward her future. Outside, the mountains stood witness, unchanged by the human dramas played out in their shadow. But on their slopes, justice had finally prevailed. In their valleys, healing had taken root. And in this small chapel, surrounded by those who had helped them fight their way back to the light, two hearts who had found each other in darkness were about to become one. The new clinic sign caught the morning sun, its fresh paint declaring Monroe Langston Medical Practice to all who passed. Clara paused to admire it on her way in, remembering the battered nursing pin she'd worn like armor just 1 year ago. Now that pin sat in a shadow box on her office wall, alongside Julia's journal and the newspaper headline announcing Henderson's conviction. The foreman's cabin had been transformed. Where once they'd hidden from pursuers, now healing happened daily. The room where she'd fought to save Sawyer's life was a modern examination room. The window they'd escaped through now let in sunshine and fresh mountain air. Even Julia's rose. Bushes had been transplanted here, blooming beneath the sign like a blessing. "Morning, Dr. Monroe Langston," Tommy Chen called out as he limped in for his weekly checkup. The young rancher's leg was healing well after the riding accident that would once have meant a 2-hour drive to the nearest hospital. Now help was just minutes away. "Any pain today, Tommy?" Clara asked, leading him to an exam room. The clinic had grown busier than she'd expected, serving not just the local ranchers, but neighboring communities as well. They'd added a second doctor last month, and were talking about expanding further, better every day thanks to you. Tommy grinned. "Pa says you're the best thing that happened to this valley since Julia Langston stood up to Henderson." Clara smiled, checking his healing bones with practiced hands. Julia's legacy lived on in more ways than one. The water rights trust she'd envisioned now helped small ranchers weather hard times. The evidence she'd gathered had led to reforms in hospital administration across 3 states. And her brother, as if summoned by her thoughts, Sawyer appeared in the doorway. He'd been up since dawn, managing the ranch, while also serving on the county board that oversaw medical services. The shoulder wound that had brought them together now only bothered him in cold weather, though he never complained when Clara insisted on massaging it. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, waiting until she finished with Tommy before pulling her into a quick embrace. "Couldn't sleep again?" "Too excited," she admitted. "The test results." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "Just came in, wanted to deliver them personally." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. They'd been trying for 6 months, hoping but not quite daring to believe. The paper inside bore the hospital letterhead she'd once feared seeing. But now, "Pregnant," she whispered, joy bubbling up like spring water. "We're going to have a baby." Sawyer's kiss tasted of morning coffee and pure happiness. They'd talked about names already. Julia, if it was a girl, of course. A new generation to carry on the legacy of healing and justice that had been won at such cost. Through the window, Clara could see the mountains where their story had begun. The snow was melting, revealing new growth beneath. Like the valley itself, life moved in cycles of death and rebirth, loss and renewal. Henderson's empire of corruption had fallen, but the communities he'd tried to destroy were growing stronger. The clinic's waiting room was filling up, ranchers with work injuries, children needing checkups, elderly patients seeking relief from arthritis. Each face represented trust rebuilt, hope restored. Clara had found her true calling here, among people who judged her by her actions rather than old headlines. "Julia would be proud," Sawyer said softly, following her gaze to the shadow box with its mementos. "Of all of this. Of you. Of us," Clara corrected, touching her still flat stomach. Their child would grow up, knowing the full story of an aunt who died fighting corruption, of parents who found each other in darkness and chose to walk toward light, of how love and justice could triumph if you were brave enough to stand your ground. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the clinic. Sign in gold. Outside, the roses Julia had planted were budding again, promising another season of beauty. Inside, healing continued, not just of bodies, but of hearts and communities. Clara squeezed Sawyer's hand once before turning to greet her next patient. They had built something precious here, in this valley where their broken paths had crossed. Something that would last long after they were gone. Love, justice, hope, and the courage to fight for all three.